All right, well, it's the System Failure Podcast, number 38.
Hey, Brian, number 38. We're starting to get up there. I guess number 52 will signify that we've been at this for a year. And so we're closing right by the end of the summer. We ought to be getting close to it was the summer of 2023 when we started this half-baked podcast, and now we're up to episode 38. That's pretty awesome. I think by episode 52 we shall be consummate professionals. So I'm really looking forward to that. In my mind, 50 is a big milestone where we will have put 50 hours, well, a lot more than 50 hours into it, but we'll have 50 hours worth of recording, and that's a good amount of time under pressure, time under tension. That's a good amount of practice, in other words, I think, to become good.
It certainly represents a long history of effort at trying to improve this podcast. At some point, I feel like we're going to have to stop introducing the number of the podcast. Like when we get to 2,304, and you're like, this is the System Failure Podcast, 2,304.
All right, well, when we get to 2034, I'm going to remind you of that, because I feel like saying the number gets funnier the higher up you go. But, okay. You can always adjust the conventions as we move forward. There's no reason to be stuck too much in tradition. And since you're the one that does the little intro, well, I guess that'll be up to your creative talents, Brian.
All right. Well, anyway, what's going on this week, Nate?
Oh, not too much. The nature of my job means that I have to go into an actual office on Monday, and I've been at home for over 5 months now, so my heart is heavy. A great misfortune's befallen me. I'm going to be under the cruel lash of the man once again, starting tomorrow. So that's where my mindset's at. What about you, Brian?
Well, I think it's another week where there's too much going on to really all tackle. Yeah. But I guess about your work, though, I mean, is going back into are you going to have, get meaning from your work, or is it going to be a soul-crushing dirge? No. Yeah, I'll just be a prisoner for 8 hours, versus being at home for 8 hours. Now, I was still kind of a prisoner at home to where I'd have to, be present. But then when the company is too disorganized to give me enough work, I can just read or do laundry or whatever. That was great. But having to be in a specific geographical location, having to be somewhere all day every day that's not your home is just absolutely heartbreaking. It's a terrible state of affairs. Well, do you get any sense of catharsis from a well-organized Excel sheet with lots of fancy things going on?
I mean, every place I get sent to is a disaster. It's a dumpster fire, and so there's I often arrive and it's just a hopeless task. You're just not going to be able to get everything organized. They just need. The last 2 assignments I've been to, the person that hired the company for which that sends me out, the company I work for, the person that did the hiring got fired on in the first week in the past 2 assignments I've had, leaving them just no one to assign, just no one to coordinate workflow or anything. So that's the level of dumpster fire we're talking about. It really, and so I do have a biased line of sight onto the goings on in the economy, but it looks to me like the same disease sickens every one of these companies, and that disease is this: they fire someone. Well, step one is the banks blow out the cost of living. The banks blow out the cost of, there's inflation from the industrial capitalists. Rent gets blown out by the finance capitalists. And, I saw we lost another restaurant, Broken Arrow, just down the street from here, closed this week.
Well, their food was way too expensive.
We used to go, Trace and I had a friend who lived in the building. It's a residential building, and then at street level, there's this restaurant, Broken Arrow. We went in there, and they had good food, but it would be, you would leave hungry, and you would have dropped $75. It's one of those restaurants where you're like, awesome. I mean, look, the food tastes great, but you've given me a single Brussels sprout and a plate, and charged me $14 for it. That's a real problem. I can't go to your restaurant and then also go through the McDonald's drive-thru menu and get to hit the dollar menu on the way home because I'm still hungry. I had to fill in the cracks. And especially now that the dollar menu is gone and McDonald's costs just as much as the restaurants do. So yeah, you can see where people would decide their job was no longer worth going to, especially if they've got young kids at home. The job has to pay more than childcare costs, right? Otherwise, it's much more sense to have a parent just stay home and forego all that childcare cost. And so someone quits, and and in the company, they'll put out their little job search posts on Indeed or whatever, but they're offering a salary that makes no sense given the economic headwinds that we're fighting here. And so, of course, they can't get anyone to fill their positions. And meanwhile, all of the work done by the person who quit is distributed amongst the other employees. But those employees don't get a raise, right? They just do more work for the same pay, and then inevitably one or two more of those people gets burnt out. And now you have a department that's can barely function, and the skeleton crews left at that point are really, it becomes this negative feedback loop where things get more difficult and no more remunerative for the existing employees. And so you get a winnowing or a dwindling in the headcount of the existing employees. And then you get this panic situation. The last company I was at, like the officers of the company were getting notices from various tax jurisdictions, federal, state, and local, that they weren't paying their taxes and they were in violation and that they were going to get criminal charges. It was a huge mess. Well, you have to cast your mind back to the era when industrial capitalism in the Industrial Revolution was replacing the old feudal system. And the whole idea there was a revolution to get rid of the crowned heads of Europe. The nobility, the noble class, owned all the land and could charge people whatever they wanted for rent. As the economy shifted from peasants working fields to people working in factories, the whole idea behind capitalism was to get rid of the nobility who had these claims on the land that people lived on, right? The whole idea was to make it so that the cost of a laborer was as low as possible, so that you could in other words, to not have to make these payments that are unnecessary for production, right? That's the definition of unearned income, payments that you can force people to make because of economic pain points, bottlenecks, or toll booths, but that aren't necessary for production. Like a jacked up rent on a worker or a jacked up cost of education is not it's not a necessary factor of production, right? It's just an extraction, and so it's an inefficiency.
Well, your current job, it's like that sci-fi show, like Quantum Leap, where the dude kind of goes in from one soul to another, and there's that famous meme where it's like, "Am I retarded?" Because he goes into an autistic person.
No, the Down syndrome person. He's like, like Scott Bakula warps into this body, and his parents come in and wake him up, and he's wearing like a Mickey Mouse shirt, and like it's Scott Bakula, the actor, right? But he looks in the mirror to see what because he's taken the body. Every show of Quantum Leap, right? The conceit is that he's in a new body. So he wakes up in his yellow Mickey Mouse T-shirt, and his parents are treating him like he's really special, and he's like, "What's going on here?" And he goes to look in the mirror, and he's asking himself, "Am I retarded?" As he looks in the mirror, and then sure enough, there's the face of his reflection looking back at him is the face of a downy kid, and not Scott Bakula at all.
Well, it's a very relatable meme. But also part of the conceit of the show, he's supposed to go in and repair these person's lives, and then he moves on to the next soul. And you do that, but you go from one travesty to another. But
right.
You stay in this. It seems like the song. It's like the boredom and pain, of dogs, by the Pink Floyd. There,
yeah, it's constant futility. But it's great if you're working from home because if there's no one to really manage workflow and no one to really if everyone else is fired, then it's like, well, I'm just here existing.
Well, it seems like a melancholy, I guess, is what I'm trying to think of. But okay, but you used to work at Pineland Farms, right? And I would have to imagine that was like a functional organization, and you were on top of the spreads over there.
Yeah, I felt like I knew what was going on at Pineland Farms, and the people were great. I loved the brass, the folks that run Pineland Farms were awesome.
Well, your landmark moment is leaving Pineland Farms to Did you start traveling? Did you quit Pineland Farms to start traveling, or did you go to some other job?
I went to WEX, you may recall.
Right.
So I quit Pineland Farms in March of 2020, and that was a huge relief. And then I went to WEX, and that job was just brutal. Do you remember I was having to answer calls at all hours? It was just a 24-hour grind, and eventually it wore me. I spent the whole COVID era doing that, and that ground me out for a whole year. For a year and 3 months, I did that, and then it was August of 2021, and I was like, well, I'm just going to blow that job off and just go traveling and hope for the best. And that really has been the best decision I've ever made. You learn a lot traveling. It really is formative. Everyone should, I think that's what people should do instead of going to college. That's what I wish I would have done. That's what I'd recommend any young person do. College is an institution whose reputation is in tatters now. They aren't preparing people for jobs. They aren't. They still the value of their credentialing is collapsed in the eyes of many employers. I just think that college is over. If you want to become a doctor or a lawyer, then you're going to need a college. But for the rest of us, we should just go traveling instead. It's a much better education.
Well, yeah, we gotta start our children off right with 6 figures of debt.
Yeah, well, that's what destroyed my job I was at for 10 years, an accounting job that you mentioned a few minutes ago. That really they were like, my income was like $2,000 a month. It was like $2,200 a month was my net income, but then my student loan payments were $1,200 a month, and I just had to live with multiple roommates, and there was just no going. And it didn't feel like. It just felt like I was a conduit between my employer and the banks. It was a really alienating experience. It was just, starting off kids that far behind the starting line, $160K in my case behind the starting line. It's the sign of a society that's vampirizing or parasitizing its own children.
Yeah, well, you could just take a trip to South Africa for a few weeks. For probably $5,000.
Yeah, less than that. The South Africa in particular has an exchange rate that's highly favorable to Americans. So if you're going to spend way less than $5K, even over the course of 3 months out there in South Africa. Now, if you head to Europe or someplace, most places don't have such a favorable exchange rate, but it's always great to visit one. Another good one, and this may have changed by the time listeners get this podcast, but Prague is great for exchange rate. You go to Prague and they do business in euros there, but like your steak costs like $12, a beautiful ribeye steak, which is like the price you'd want to pay for a steak. So Prague had like sensible prices. Florence had, most of the rest of Europe has outrageous prices, and South Africa had incredibly cheap prices. So that kind of depends on, you can strategically plan your travels depending on where the exchange rate is favorable at any given time, eh?
Well, yeah, the myth of going to college, I guess, brings me to one of the points I wanted to make on the podcast today.
Here we go.
Well, I think just the idea is that, as we move into the future and with the advent of technology and whatnot, life should be getting easier, right? And I think that's probably the huge disconnect between, the boomers and the millennials and whatnot, and why there's maybe all this tension. Or at least, I feel like, I don't know, talking to our own parents or, boomers in general, that they're confused about what's going on with the kids these days. And, but it's just obvious that life is way harder now than it used to be. You just have to look at any possible metric. But
what do you mean specifically? Which metrics? I want to know what you mean when you say life is harder versus easier. I'm going to agree with you, but I just want you to flesh it out for our audience.
Well, look at the number of homeless people. It's always gone up, at least in my lifetime. I don't know what it was like in the 50s. And then, we start all our kids off with 6 figures in debt, right?
Yeah.
And then being bombarded. Well, what's the teen suicide rate these days? And and no one has is from intact families.
Mm-hmm.
I guess we are more people are out of shape and fat, and we have all kinds of health issues, and also you can't trust the media. Tim Dillon was talking about that on Tucker Carlson about how he used to just trust the media and whatnot, and now the idea of trusting the experts is such a an insane idea. Which also brings up Andrew Cuomo on the PPD.
Yeah, we'll get there, but that's you put a whole bunch on the chessboard here. So let's sort of. It sounded like you had basically 3 primary areas when you say life is harder now. It's harder to just be healthy, right? Public health is in a state of wretched collapse. Obviously, just since the 80s, 40% of Americans have been obese, which no one was obese before the 80s, and then they introduced the corn syrups and the high fructose corn syrup, and the vegetable oils, the seed oils, and now, now it's 45% of us are obese.
Well, they got all your Sour Patch Kids say fat free on them, right. And everyone's obese as can be eating their Sour Patch Kids and whatnot, and destroying themselves.
So that's rock number 1. We look under. There's 3. Looking under the 3. Looking under our. Surveying the wreckage of modern society. Right. There's public health. There's mental health, and I'll just lump the media, social media, and the regular media. We'll just lump them all into this whole media category. People's minds are blown out by the infinite scroll feed. We're being lied to and manipulated by our social media apps. The Cambridge Analytica scandal is a great example of that. Everyone knows about that one. And then finally, just financially, it's obvious that the cost, every all the debts are all blown out, like sovereign debt, student loan debt, credit card debt, auto debt, mortgage debt. You name the category of debt is to discover a shocking new historical high.
Well, it's like worse than that because, well, I mean, I work at like AAA, right? And well, just in this post-COVID world, like, it's just so like futile. Like just the auto, anything related to like auto insurance, like repairing vehicles and like just getting parts, finding people to do the work or finding people to run the tow trucks is just so like financially like the needle you need to thread is so tight these days.
What can you talk more about that? Why is it so hard to find people to work the normal roadside assistance roles that AAA has been running for 50 years now?
Well, the thing is like McDonald's will pay you like $20 an hour to work, and like that's what tow truck drivers used to be paid, and so you could pay tow truck. Well, just a AAA membership. They're trying to keep it like $63 or whatever it is because they want to keep like old people able to afford them, right? And so, I mean, like a AAA membership should cost like $100 probably for like what you, if you think about like what you're trying to get to have happen, like, you know, you break down the side of the road and you need to materialize someone to get you going, you know, on your trip again. Yeah. Like, what should that cost, right? And like $63 is like way too cheap. But I mean, we just can't raise the price to like $100 for a membership, right?
Yeah.
And then it's like just a problem. Like all the supply chains got destroyed during the COVID because like all like, you know, the factories and whatnot shut down. And so, and there's just a similar problem with like how much we pay body shops to repair vehicles and whatnot. And like building homes, like if your home gets wiped out and you need to make an insurance claim, the cost of like replacing your home because it burned down or something is just catastrophically through the roof. Like all the materials are unobtainable, the workers are unobtainable, and this reality still, like, I mean, we're like years out here, and we have not caught up to this problem. Like the inflation is still not realized, right?
What you would need for your tow truck, what you need to make your job easier, getting these tow truck drivers to agree to make these roadside assistant calls, is one of two things. Either you need the cost of living for these tow truck drivers to go down, or you need their desperation to go up. Right? Isn't that the calculus from the corporate point of view?
Yes, and I think we're going to be leaning on the desperation.
Yeah, well, all right, you can't pay out, right? You're not going to be able to pay out actual value for these people's labor, right? That would impinge on corporate profits. Is AAA run as a nonprofit? Do you know what its tax status is?
Well, we're like a member club, ultimately. So I'm not really.
What that means.
I'm not really. We are like a member organization, though.
But there is there are like, do you know, AAA it's privately owned? And there must be a certain amount of profit taking realized by the, like, I mean, it's like it must be some kind of a corporation where it must have some board of directors, right? And
there's certainly like a board of directors and like a president and whatnot, but I don't think we actually have an owner. I want to say.
So there's going to be a bunch of people who own stock in the company represented by the board members, is what it is, versus a single owner.
I'm not sure. I don't know. I don't think there's like AAA stock is the thing. I think it's, well, I mean, to be fair to AAA, I mean, we really care about our member satisfaction. And like on these crazy surveys we put out, you know, like 89% of the members like nationwide, you know, say they're totally satisfied with the service that they receive. And the whole system is kind of like most of the workers at AAA at any job are getting, you know, incentivized based on hitting high customer satisfaction scores. And so, broadly speaking, that's how it works. But the fundamental issue, insurance, like auto insurance is like a reasonable industry compared to like health insurance, because like health insurance, you have to like trust the experts, right? Whereas, and that's like a political thing. Whereas like repairing automobiles, it's just like, I don't know, who can do it for the cheapest and like most efficiently is kind of who wins, right? And that like isn't really the situation with healthcare, is it?
Yeah.
So I mean, I think auto insurance like does, you know, I guess it can be a hassle to deal with, but they do help keep costs down in our like. It's like way cheaper to repair your vehicle through like your insurance, and if you go to an auto body shop on your own, they're gonna like jack up your rates. Like your auto insurance will actually get in there and negotiate the rates down and find more cost-effective parts. And there's this whole crazy apparatus where when your vehicle becomes a total loss, it goes to a junkyard, and people are salvaging the parts to, you know, be put into more damaged vehicles. And I think it's all a pretty efficient apparatus and is not a plague on society, unlike healthcare. Well, I'm not like really a healthcare worker, and I don't know the ins and outs, but it certainly seems like a catastrophe from an observer's standpoint.
Do you think that the healthcare industry could be improved by having it administrated as a public service? Like you just take the cost of everyone's car accidents and then subtract the cost of all of their premiums, and you just charge exactly what is, you just charge people. You're going to have to charge people premiums based on their risk profiles, but if you did it with no profit, could you think you could do an even better job if it was provided like if it was administrated like that, or does the profit motive AAA really important to its functioning?
I think probably, I don't think I would change it. I think if you tried to make it like a public organization, I think it would probably not be, I think it would probably end up being like worse. I guess I think it's like an okay about capitalism is the auto insurance industry, would be my opinion.
Interesting. So all of the profits of the automotive on the auto, like the Geicos, the State Farms, like all of these guys are just, I mean, they have all this money to spend on NFL ads. And so you think that the profit motive saves more money than the huge amount of profits that the collectively speaking, not just AAA, but just the whole industry sucks out of the economy every year. Their profit margins are. You think that the capitalist structure gains us back more than we lose in the profit, than we leak in the profit margins out to these giants like State Farm?
Well, I mean, I'd say the proof is in the pudding. In that, like, you go get an estimate to like repair your vehicle, like smash up your vehicle and go get a repair estimate, and then make an insurance claim, and then see what your insurance comes up with for an estimate, and you're gonna see a big difference, like 95% of the time.
Yeah, but I'm just wondering, would I save money on my premiums by you running it non-for-profit? That would be you just have to compare it to that, but I just have no idea what that would look like, and how much of these insurance premiums are really going to corporate profit. I'm not really sure.
I guess if I were to bitch about the the corporate structure, there is a thing where it is like a corporate behemoth, and not all of the people who work at AAA seem like equally intelligent. And, you could maybe start your own insurance company with a bunch of smart people. The thing is you do need like a crazy amount of money to kind of make the whole thing work. I don't know. I really don't think like auto insurance is like a cancer in our society.
Okay, well, that's good. I always imagined that the economy should look like a 3-layer wedding cake with capitalists, small businesses all being run on a capitalist basis, medium-sized business. Whenever you go to sell your business, you have to offer it to employees first, have it run as a worker co-op. And then, of course, then there's the natural monopoly. Once you get so big that you're a natural monopoly, like the Google search bar, then you just have to be run as a public utility, a not-for-profit public utility. And so I'm just wondering where we would slot in the auto insurance in that hierarchy. And it sounds like you think that capitalism works pretty well in the auto insurance field, eh?
Well, the thing about Google is it's this DARPA project, right?
Yeah.
And so, these things are actually publicly funded, should maybe be public institutions and do good by us, do good for us. And so, yeah.
Well, certainly true. In the case of a natural monopoly, I mean, if you just have a captive, if there was a monopoly on insurance, they would jack the premiums up and just make tons of money off of us. And so, as long as there's plenty of stiff competition in the auto insurance realm, then it should run fine until technology obviates. Until broadly speaking, technology obviates the need for workers in the larger economy, and the entire system of employee and employers goes down the tubes. But I think that we're pointing out a lot of the dysfunction that's surrounding us. You were talking about mental health, physical health, and the media, or mental health, physical health, and financial health. It does feel like we're entering the last stages where we are just at the point where it's just dividing people into employees and employers and organizing production in that fashion is just becoming. It's not the application of technology to that is going to obviate the necessity. It's going to destroy the need for workers in a system like that. And destroying the need for workers means that workers can't force employers to pay them. And if workers can't force employers to pay them, then employers won't have anyone to sell the products and services to that their companies create. And it feels like we're in that cycle. There's that prophecy of doom, right? And then there's the other prophecy of doom, where the industrial capital is scheduled for destruction when technology makes it so that it doesn't need workers anymore, and then ironically, it won't have anyone to buy its product. Then there's the finance capital side, where the interest payments on debt and monopoly rent and unnecessary production costs end up crowding out the rest of the economy. Or eventually, the debt that we all owe to rich, like we're borrowing money, we're solving the problem created by the lack of spending power of the working class because their technology has eroded their negotiating power, and we're solving that issue with debt, right? With finance capital. So we're borrowing money from the wealthy at interest in order so that we have enough money to buy the wealthy's products, so that the wealthy don't have to pay us a wage for our work, right? That seems to be they're two related prophecies of doom. Like we could maybe say that the technology destroying industrial capital is more or less what Marx prophesied in Capital Volume 1, and then Volumes 2 and 3 of Capital, which were published after his death, extend that prophecy to suggest that financial collapse in like the banking sector is where we should expect the first cracks to appear as the capitalist system marches into the sunset, and that really seems to be what's happening. And just all the ways you pointed out earlier, things are worse now than they were in the 50s. In terms of the food that we're being sold, in terms of the quality of the media we're consuming, and in terms of just the straight up financial deal that we all have, the financial relationship we all have with the system, eh?
Well, one thing I've been thinking about Marx's Glorious Revolution, and you've actually sat down and read these books, right?
I have never read Capital 1, 2, and 3. They are really long. I should one of these days. But you could read the Communist Manifesto, or the one I always recommend to people is Wage, Labor, and Capital by Marx and Engels. That literally is a really short book. It's maybe like 40 or 50 pages. It's meant to be a pamphlet. It's meant to be a really concise way of grokking these ideas. So,
well, my understanding of Marx's ideas, well, it just seems like we're trying to have like one glorious capitalist revolution, as opposed to, I think it's just more like when things get too hot, top heavy, like when all the media unifies in decrying Donald Trump and supporting mandatory vaccinations and COVID lockdowns and whatnot. I mean, things inevitably squirt through, like Elon Musk up and buys Twitter, or they can't shut down Joe Rogan or whatever, and so. I mean, I think there's a bit of an ebb and flow to it. Although I also want to say that creating a crazy quagmire, you can see why it's just so advantageous for our reptilian overlords to perpetrate like a COVID or 9/11 on us, because now the economy is destroyed, and people really, they can't demand the wages like you were saying back there. Yeah. I guess that's a problem, but there are like some forces, I guess, pushing back also, though. So I guess I have some mixed feelings there.
Well, you wouldn't expect, I always use the fall of Rome and the collapse of medieval society in the 14th century as my sort of models for guessing how things are going to proceed this time. And like, there's one view where it's all about kind of how far in the future you're looking, where your vantage point is, because you could call the fall of Rome a cataclysmic collapse, but it really took several hundred years, from a massive civil war to bring us Julius Caesar to the final emperor of the Western Roman Empire being deposed in 476. That's like 400 years. It's for the people living at the time. It didn't feel like a cataclysmic collapse. It felt like a slow unwinding, and punctuated by cataclysmic moments like the sack of Rome by Alaric the Visigoth in 410, right? That's like a terrifying thing that happened. So it's like it happens fast and slow. Same with the collapse of a medieval society in the mid 14th century. It took a whole century for the Renaissance to arrive after that, and probably a good and then of course you had the Reformation after the Renaissance, and then the Counter-Reformation in the Baroque period. So it's it's really like the Renaissance to the Industrial Revolution is the period of revolution that marked the transition from medieval to modern, and it's also a couple hundred years when we mark the transition from the ancient world to the medieval world, vis-a-vis the fall of Rome. So yeah, I don't know. I want it all to happen tomorrow and move on with my life. But you're right. It's going to be we're going to be looking back at history. We're going to be people in the hundreds of years from now will be looking back at the collapse of the American Empire as if it was this cataclysmic event. But the reality is a little more banal when you're living through it. But I think it's also worth mentioning that history kind of speeds up over time. And if you're a 11th century French farmer, you might see one technological improvement that changes you may have a new plow handle or something that changes your life. You'd be lucky to see something like that in the course of your lifetime. But here we are with with AI coming out last year and the iPhone 10 years before that. It's like we're just seeing things one right after another revolutionize society in a really fast pace. In other words, the pace of technological progression is accelerating exponentially, and I think history itself is accelerating kind of along those same lines. So I don't expect it'll be 400 years before we have a new system in place, but it might be a couple decades, and that seems like a long time when you're actually living it.
I guess I think maybe like dangling out. Well, you just maybe get you might get susceptible to Stalinism or whatever if you burn too hot on the revolution about to happen.
Well, there's a thing where the revolution becomes more about revenge and less about making a bright future, and there's definitely examples of excesses like that in the histories of Cuba and China and North and South Korea and Vietnam and Russia.
This so-called cultural Marxism or whatever, it seems revenge based at times.
Yeah. Well, there's a business right in the 60s, Mao, there had been major issues with the revolution in China, and Mao blamed a whole bunch. He blamed parties within the revolution itself and university professors, and he basically the revolution had not gone as planned. There was a disaster, there was a bunch of disasters with trying to implement Chinese communism, and Mao came out and blamed all these people and got the young college students in the 60s to just turn on their authorities, and they would dress up their college professors in dunce caps and march them through the streets, and they would have these things called struggle sessions where you would put this professor on the stage and make them admit to crimes, so it would feel good to do that to Fauci or for me, but that's really an unhealthy impulse, right? We've got to try to move on and not blame, not get into revenge mode. We got to get into healthy improvements and not devolve into struggle sessions. And that, of course, Brian, brings us to the appearance of Mr. Chris Cuomo or his debate on the PBD podcast with Dave Smith, which we watched on Friday night, which really felt to me like one of these Maoist struggle sessions. How did you interpret it?
Well, I felt like our reptilian overlords really showed their scaly hides. Andrew Cuomo, he looks like Vince McMahon up there. He looks like he's playing a character. And I mean, just the way they would hammer him about how, his doctor prescribed him ivermectin, so he's taking ivermectin. And then he criticized Joe Rogan for taking ivermectin, and all Joe Rogan said was that he took ivermectin among other things prescribed by his doctor.
Right.
And he just could not acknowledge that there's something to apologize for. But he would say that Donald Trump doesn't apologize for anything, and that's part of his strategy. And it seemed like a gamesmanship. He doesn't seem like he's up there trying to be honest. He seemed like a slippery reptile, basically.
Yeah. Well, yeah, he's up there trying to save his own hide, I think. He did the bidding of his corporate masters in front of the CNN cameras by, they in order to get their emergency use authorization for that vaccine, they couldn't have any other effective treatments. So they had to denigrate ivermectin, the Pulitzer Prize winning antiviral drug. They had to denigrate it as horse paste, because they just couldn't have anything. They couldn't have any alternative treatments to COVID besides this shot, because otherwise they couldn't get the emergency use authorization for the shot. They couldn't get the legal immunity from the fallout from it. And so Chris Cuomo, he dutifully read these things into the teleprompter in his days at CNN, only to discover that he then suffered a vaccine injury and that his doctor prescribed him ivermectin. And so now acknowledging those things has caused the corporate power structures in America to spit him out, right? He's no longer useful to them. And so now he comes crawling to the alternative media space, wanting to ingratiate himself therein. But Dave Smith was having none of it on PBD's debate stage there on Friday night. And so it just felt like Dave Smith just hammered him and they played clips of, Cuomo saying these things, and he just kind of, he would speak without ever saying anything. He would just kind of just start saying things, just anything to kind of try to any kind of point he could make, but without addressing the criticisms being leveled against him. So I thought it was like wildly uncomfortable to watch it. I thought it would feel better to strike at one of these media talking heads, but it was just uncomfortable. I thought. Did you feel that discomfort, Brian? Do you think that the awkwardness was palpable?
Well, I felt. Well, it was funny. The crowd kept on booing, that was awesome. But I think he's up there to be an establishment shill. If he wanted to try to win over the reasonable audience or whatever, he would say, "Oh yeah, I was a shill for CNN and I was getting paid to say this thing, and I was wrong."
Well, I think he thinks that if he says that, we will all not tune into his new upcoming podcast on the PBD network. No one will believe him.
Well, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, I would be really interested if he went and said that, right? I mean, maybe he's just really dumb, but I don't think he is dumb. I think he knows just what he's doing, and I think he's some kind of CIA shill, or he's had training in what he's doing, because he's carefully deflecting these points and whatnot. It's like in Inception, when they're trying to break into, get the guy who plays Scarecrow from Batman Begins, and he's got they break into his mind, but he's got defense, he's got security in there and whatnot. And so this dude obviously has been trained to prevent Inception or whatever. Something's going on there. Was my opinion.
I kind of disagree. I think I think that if he had made earnest mistakes and copped to it, that we would find him more credible. But that's not what he's done, right? He has uncritically been a stenographer for Pfizer, which just means his willingness to do that is going to make him untrustworthy. So he could admit to an earnest mistake, but he can't admit to a non-earnest mistake, and non-earnest mistakes are the ones that he's made. So I think he's in backpedal, apology, struggle session mode. He didn't seem like some consummate CIA trained professional doing a psyop on all of us. He seemed like he was up there really sucking canal water.
Well,
that's what I saw. Anyway.
He didn't apologize for anything.
Well, right, yeah. Well, he can't apologize for being a Pfizer stenographer. That's the only thing that's going to disqualify him from having a podcast on PBD's network, to my way of thinking.
Well, see, that wouldn't disqualify him at all, though.
Why not?
Well, why would that disqualify? I mean, that would would garner interest in his podcast.
Brett Weinstein gets things wrong, and then cops do it on his pod, and it only makes the dark horse blow up, right? That's to your point. But Cuomo has not made earnest mistakes, right? He has intentionally misled us before, and he can't admit to being intentionally misleading us, because then we'll never follow his pod on. He won't be able to get a following in the alternative media. He can apologize for a great many things, but being dishonest is something he can't apologize for, or he won't be accepted in the new media space now that he's been ejected from the corporate media space. Just my opinion. I could be totally wrong.
Well, I think our reptilian overlords need to try to save face here, and that's why this all happened. And I mean, I don't know. I can't imagine. I should try listening to what his podcast is on PBD's network. I just can't imagine what he talks about on there.
I don't know for sure that he has a podcast on PBD's network. I assume that that's his goal, right? I assume obviously he's trying to make an entry into the new media space. As I mentioned, having been ejected from the old.
I guess I thought that was part of this whole thing. He's getting a show on his network, and that's part of him doing this debate. And,
well, I would assume so. I just don't know that for sure.
All right.
Yeah. Well, we've got some other big news this week, Brian. As you may recall, this is the week that the Donald got hit with 32 felony convictions in the state of New York. Is it the state or the city? I can't remember. It's New York, but I think it's the city and not the state that's suing him. Or that's pressing criminal charges. Or maybe it is the state. I'm not sure. But the legal structure is that the Donald intentionally misclassified payments to this porn star is campaign funds in 2016, and so that's a misdemeanor. But the legal theory here is that he did that in order to commit a federal crime, election interference, and that not allowing the voters in 2016 to know about the Stormy Daniels case was election interference, and so that's why he's getting hit with charges in New York for election. These are the felonies, right? And our president Joe Biden's tweeting out, "No one's above the law," in celebration of the Donald's convictions. Of course, there's pictures of Joe Biden's son snorting crack all over the internet, and he doesn't seem to be in prison for possession of crack, despite the fact that Joe Biden himself was railing against drug users in the 80s on the floor of the Senate, striding up and down and declaring the no-tolerance policy towards these sorts of crimes. But no one above the law. Slightly humorous, obviously. Presidents are above the law. I think Smith was pointing this out in the debate. Like, obviously, like Obama's drone program. The presidents are always doing horribly illegal things and never getting prosecuted for it. It's just part of the reality of politics. But I don't know what do you think, Brian? I mean, my own opinion would be that this is just going to bolster the support for the Donald, just like all of the other legal lawfare that they have that they've deployed against the Donald. All it does is drive his numbers higher. I think this is going to backfire in the face of the incompetent establishment, just like everything else they've done has backfired in their face. What do you reckon, Brian?
Well, I mean, it seems like what happened is, back in 2016 or, leading up to the election, the Donald's running, Stormy Daniels is like threatening to blow the lid on some story. And so Donald Trump, all right, well, here's some hush money. And, I guess like the National Enquirer is involved or something.
I think the story is that Stormy sold her story to the National Enquirer, even though the Donald, post 2000, like during the Donald administration, Stormy sold her story to the National Enquirer, but despite the fact she'd signed a non-disclosure and agreed to a payment to not so she signed a document saying she'd never had any sexual relations with the Donald, and accepted the check, and then totally welched on that, and blew the lid off the whole thing during the Donald's administration. Isn't this the story? I mean, it could have some details wrong, and now the state, like the federal prosecutors, declined to prosecute this case, but New York picked it up for political reasons, and they're trying to hit the Donald. Well, the Donald's felony charges are misclassifying these payments to the porn star in order to mislead, committing this, like that misdemeanor was done in order to commit this other federal felony election tampering charge.
Yeah, well, and anyway, like one way or another, the Donald Trump gave some hush money to Stormy Daniels, and they want to give him like 36 felonies. It's just pretty weak, I guess. I guess it doesn't. I don't think it's gonna hold, right? You'd have to say, and I mean, I guess the Donald Trump has had like record-breaking like single day or contributions. He's made like $52.8 million or something.
Yeah, his fundraising has gone through the roof. Obviously, he's going to appeal this. I think the appeal will be after the election potentially, and then I think he has, because it's federal, because New York has charged him with charges that are federal in nature, or intent to commit crimes that are federally illegal, that he has recourse to the Supreme Court itself also, and so we'll see.
They just should have gotten like something that's like actually sticky. I mean, they just have to kind of say, well, it's 36 felonies is kind of what the mainstream media has to focus on, rather than like what this actual indictment is like supposed to mean. And it's just obviously completely some misclassifying of funds. I mean, it should be like a misdemeanor, right? It
is a misdemeanor. It's only the conspiracy to commit further crimes that makes it a felony.
And just as Dave Smith pointed out, they don't want to come after him for anything like real, because those same charges could be levied against their regular establishment shills.
Yeah, extrajudicial, like FISA warrants, extrajudicial killings. I think actually the Donald. No, that's Joe Biden has rolled back the extrajudicial drone killing program. It was that's an Obama era program. It kept going by the Donald. So you could prosecute the Donald for that, dropping the mother of all bombs. You may recall in Afghanistan. It's like there's all kinds of horrible things you could prosecute the Donald for, but tampering with the 2016 election by making a hush money agreement with a porn star. It's just not. It's not a thing that anyone's going to take seriously. So you're right. They have to hammer the convicted felon without, just have that be a talking point without digging too much, looking under the surface to see what else is under that iceberg. So yeah, I agree with you there.
They should have made some kind of like a reasonable conviction, or I don't know. Well, it's gonna amp up the Trump support, and I mean, even if he does go to prison, he's gonna like win from prison. Yeah. And although I mean, I don't even know if it like really matters, because it's probably a giant kayfabe anyway, and they just want to make sure RFK doesn't get elected. And I'm sure if Donald Trump gets elected, it'll be basically the same regime as usual. Yeah. I mean, unless he goes in there and pardons like Julian Assange and Edward Snowden and does the alien disclosure and talk about JFK. But, there's a whole lot of nothing on that front in his first administration. So I think it's just a giant distraction.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think what really matters to the establishment is that we don't have RFK rise to power and clean out the regulatory agencies and have a nice look back into the COVID era and the conduct of Doctors Fauci and Daszak and some of these other villains of that era. They just want to make sure that it's really exciting. And look, we've been talking about it for the last 20 minutes, the Donald and his exciting legal jeopardy. But what we should really be talking about is the distinction between earned and unearned income, in my estimation.
I think it's probably another reminder to like stay off the social medias. The discourse on Reddit is just pretty sad right now, so I would stay away from there.
Reddit is heavily, heavily, heavily influenced. It's the best social media format in my view. I don't love Instagram or Facebook. I don't love the way that Twitter's set up. I like the Twitter user base. I wish the Twitter user base was on Reddit using the Reddit format, but of course Reddit is one of these compromised corporations. They had an IPO a couple months ago. I mean, they're just not. They will just nuke any opinion that's not blue, no matter who. That's not blue MAGA. And so it's just hopeless trying to go on Reddit. Some of the smaller subreddits are great. Your NHL and NFL subreddits are great, but as far as the general opinion goes on there, it's truly impoverished. So, my wish would be to get all of the Twitter users on Reddit, and then. But the problem with Reddit is that there's just too many. The control is so. The individual mods that Reddit puts in control of their big subreddits are so. These are people that work for free that are like dysfunctional in some way, right? What kind of a person wants to devote their spare time moderating Reddit forums? It's just that's going to attract a certain kind of candidate. That's a problem too. Twitter doesn't rely on these
moderators.
Yeah, I was going to say petty tyrants or petty authorities. And the petty authorities are like a huge problem. It doesn't really. In some places, like on r/late stage capitalism, the opinion has swung against Joe Biden. But for years, it was a pro Joe Biden subreddit. And if you have an opinion that goes against the current, you have a real problem with these aforementioned petty authorities who want to gatekeep their individual subreddits. Even like my story is r/collapse. I had a essay that was somewhat critical of science or somewhat critical of the epistemology of science, and like I had a mod from r/collapse like nuke the story, even though it had been already approved by other mods. It's just like so crazy. So anyway, I think probably Reddit good. I mean, great if you want to see some NFL highlights from the weekend prior. Not so great for anything else.
Well, I think all of this kind of goes back to my hypothesis about how, this is all part of why it's harder today than it was in the past. And a big part of it's just crazy information overload and just the overall madness of the political discourse and whatnot. It's enough to fry anyone's brain.
These social media platforms could be a way of parsing and organizing this blast of information, but instead they're being used to confuse and misdirect.
Well, Reddit, in fact, was that when it first started.
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
But yeah, it's. We've talked about. We've lamented many times what happened leading up to, Hillary Clinton being the DNC candidate over Bernie.
Yeah.
Well, I just also on that topic, just one other thing is that, Ari Shaffir was on Howie Mandel's podcast. And, Howie Mandel is like a germaphobe shut-in. And Ari Shaffir is like, a mushroom-taking comic. And, he's like Jewish and so is Howie Mandel, right? And Howie Mandel's like, so yeah, how about that anti-Semitism? And like Ari's like, no, it's not real. Doesn't happen. I go all over the country. I tour nonstop. And Howie Mandel's like, well, if you don't want to see it, maybe it's not real. But he just goes online, right? And it's this crazy conflagration online, but it's just not like real. And like, I think, pretty much is, if you just go outside, right? If you like close the laptop, that's what Ari Shafir was saying.
Yeah.
It's not real, and yet everyone is like hyper afraid of the police, or I don't know. Like we have like the anti-Zionist protest here in Longfellow Square like every Saturday, and there's also some like pro-Zionist or pro-Israeli protests as well. It's not like anyone's like getting beat up or killed or anything, right? But we're all like in this hyper agitated state from the online media. And Ari Shafir made a mockery of Howie Mandel. But anyway, that's just like another brick in the wall, so to speak, of the crazy problems that we have in this day and age. It's completely insane that people. It is crazy. Like it was a wild interview there. He really made a mockery of Howie Mandel. It was awesome.
I remember God Saad on the JRE recently talking about how he couldn't go on campus, and Joe Rogan stopped him. I was like, let's double click on that. What do you mean you can't go on campus? And God was like, it was like one day where I wasn't sure if I should go on campus. It was just pathetic. I do think the media is banging the media, who is corporate owned, they are all in on supporting Israel and whatever they want to do, because the people that own the media are the same that own the weapons manufacturers. So the media wants to portray any criticism of Israel as anti-Semitism. And so we're in an environment where the media is warning us about anti-Semitism. So then, there's three, like there's your high school kids who are going to see this and want to cause some kind of a kerfuffle and realize that all they have to do is go down to their local middle school and scratch a swastika into the swing set there, and then they will get on the local news, right? As anti-Semitism, incidents of anti-Semitism are rising in Maine, right? So you're gonna, when you have the media stoking an anti-Semitic hysteria, you're going to get people who are just doing it for the attention, who would never have dreamed about, who don't care at all about anti-Semitism, may not even care about the conflict in Israel. They just want to get a reaction. That is definitely a factor. There's also a factor that when in the context of dwindling economic resources, you're going to see fewer and fewer. When it's the case that someone's babies aren't going to be able to eat, that divides society, right? That you're going to start, when you have to take food away from your neighbor's kids' mouths to put it in your own kid's mouth, you're going to start thinking of reasons to demonize your neighbors because you don't want to feel like a monster. And superficial religious differences or difference in skin color, just the sort of thing you can seize on to justify to justify taking food from other people when there's not enough food to go around. So you will always get an uptick in racism and any kind of suspicion of your neighbors that's possible. You're going to get an uptick in that when you're taking things, when people feel that economic resources are becoming more and more scarce versus more and more abundant.
Well, it's super easy to like stoke these fears online because there'll be like one case out of a million of some shocking police brutality or something, and they'll be like, "Well, this is you have to be afraid of the police." And
so there's like anytime you have when you have the middle class being destroyed, you're going to have an uptick in suspicion of other ethnic groups or other gender. People are going to squabble amongst themselves inevitably, and you're going to get some of these upticks in something like anti-Semitism. But then, of course, there's also the attention seekers, as mentioned. And it's just really
well, it's like a perfect tool for our reptilian overlords just to stoke these fears online and have it not be grounded in reality. Like, I mean, they get all the fear and they don't even have to like materialize like any there's no like burning crosses or swastikas like on the street or whatever.
Well, it will. The more you cry wolf, though, right? There's a cost to that. You cry wolf too many times, and people will stop believing you. And I think we're getting there to where people will say, you know what, I'm willing to criticize the policy of the Likud party in Israel, and you can call it anti-Semitism if you want, but that's like clearly there's tens of thousands of women and children being butchered, and criticizing that does not mean that one has an inherent hatred of the Jewish people as a whole. That's just crazy. Do you remember Brett Weinstein and Heather on the Dark Horse back in October playing the final cut, and weeping and like being like, I feel like Roger maybe does have some anti-Semitism, and you're like, what? I mean, October 7th was crazy. And I think anyone who is of Jewish descent probably would have strong feelings after October 7th. So highly understandable. But it does seem like a comical overreaction looking back in time at it now, doesn't it?
Well, you got like Sam Harris putting out like a podcast like last week. So like months after the fact now saying, yeah, I guess I've decided that, any critique of Israel after October 7th is in fact anti-Semitic.
Wow. Really? He said it in that way?
Yeah. Wow. It's truly shameful.
Poor Sam Harris.
It was, it was shocking.
I feel like, like A Day in the Life of the CEO, whatever that reality show was where like the CEO of like Waste Management would have to live as an employee, a typical employee of that company. Poor Sam Harris. He just needs to like spend a couple months working at like a coffee shop and trying to figure out how he's going to make rent. A couple months of that, and I think things will really, like the fact that Sam inherited that sweet, sweet Golden Girls money. Everyone knows that his mom was a writer on Golden Girls or like invented the show. And the fact that he's got that sweet Golden Girls money means that instead of going to college, he can just go off to Nepal and, do LSD and lie in a rowboat in the middle of a lake. But for the rest of us, the hustle is really getting crazy, and that it's just impossible to understand the rise of the dollar without understanding the class warfare extent in this country.
Sam Harris needs to get a job washing dishes.
Yeah. Well, just make it work for a couple, 3 months. Washing dishes and trying to make your rent, which is it's $2,700 for a studio. It's going to be awesome. So you can work all month, just to tread water and get nowhere. That I think is what poor Sam is missing. Man, I really loved Sam in the 2000s. The New Atheist thing was awesome. He got me with meditation, with his book Lying. I mean, these are just all outstanding. But his complete lack... the boomers, right? And Sam Harris is a Gen Xer, but like that, like the people lack a class analysis in America. That is our real blind spot. And Sam's whole philosophy is just completely severed from any sort of class analysis, and it has led him in the class warfare is so integral to what's going on that has led Sam into a crazy cul-de-sac. It'll be interesting to hear. It'll be interesting to hear what becomes of poor Sam Harris and his career as a public intellectual after this. It sure is sad, and I just can't believe that he said what you're saying he said about criticism of Israeli foreign policy or domestic policy, really, because the Palestinians live inside Israel.
Well, I'm sure Sam Harris and all his friends in his ivory tower will continue to look down on us for our judgments of Israel, for their, burying every man, woman, and child in Gaza under a giant pile of rubble.
Well, Sam and his friends in their ivory tower can look forward to continued lack of relevance then, because that is just so beyond the pale. Well, Brian, speaking of the disaster that is social media and the manipulative nature of it, I know you didn't get a chance to hear Mr. Duncan Trussell on the Jerry this past week, but one thing he was pointing out was the and this is something I hadn't realized but have since looked into a little bit. The comments on your Instagram, your Facebook, your Reddit posts are different depending on the user that's looking at them, right? Have you realized this?
No.
So you and I will pull up the same Instagram post and we'll get different comment. One example I saw online is there's some Instagram chick talking about her. There's a post where a woman is upset that her boyfriend hasn't come home from golfing. That's the plot. And then she was looking at her phone and it was all posts talking about how disrespectful the man was by saying he was going to be home from golf at 3:30 but not coming home till 6. But she had her boyfriend look at the same post, and all his comments were like, "What's up with this ungrateful, woman? Why does she have to harass her man nonstop? Can't he have a few hours of freedom without being some huge problem?" You're like, "Wow, it's no wonder we're so divided."
Yeah, well, it makes sense that the algorithm's going to want to maximize for engagement, and so they're going to show you. They might as well show you the most inflammatory comments. And I guess I didn't realize that was going on, but it sure
they're
makes
showing
sense.
The most inflammatory comments to you personally, right? So I'll have a different set of inflammatory comments depending on my user profile. We are just not going to be able to agree. That is going to fracture us. Like our reality really is breaking down into every. Platonism is, the old man Plato is always coming up on this show, but the idea that reality is something we're creating versus something that we're only experiencing really comes into play when you think about how much our perception of reality is altered by these social media platforms and their slimy, manipulative ways. And the fact that these, I don't know whether it's more destructive that these apps are being run for profit or that the people that run them for profit they're embedded in a much larger constellation of financial interests, namely defense contractors, and pharmaceutical entities and pharmaceutical corporations. So would they rather run Instagram at a loss but use it to prop up support for the defense contractors, right? So you're like, so how many layers are there to this onion? The thing is totally untrustworthy. You just cannot interface with that.
I think that's the whole name of the game for the establishment at this point.
Yeah, it's like the addictive nature of the apps. The infinite scroll is born of capitalism, right? Trying to maximize your attention span, trying to take every second of your life they can from you, maximize your engagement with the app. And so that's like the capitalist part of it. But then that's like the part, the profit motive makes the app addictive. And then the content that they put through this addictive pipe is determined by even broader capitalist interests. It's a real mess. I have to get off of Reddit. It's just, this is terrible. I really think that showing people different comments depending on what the algorithm thinks your values are is really insidious. It's just going to make it the peasants are going to be arguing amongst each other till the end of time. Well, the kings sit in their castle and eat all of our food for us. Man, it really feels like reform or any kind of change is hopeless when you're faced with this kind of technology.
Well, I never really went on the Instagram, and I'm glad I haven't. So is this happening on Reddit too? Is that the case? And is this like happening on the X and YouTube?
Great question. I would think I don't know about X and I don't know about Reddit, but on all the other platforms, you have Facebook, the ones owned by Meta for sure. So I think it's going to be across the board. Like every app is in some way the infinite scroll bar, right? You're scrolling down, and as you're scrolling, it's loading more content as you're going, so you never run. It's like an endless treadmill.
Well, Twitter is going to have its own issues with the endless scroll. If you go under that, recommended for you tab,
stay away.
That's a place of the damned for sure. But a lot of if you're following someone that only has. If you're just engaging with small bits of your community, it's just hard to imagine them really tailoring the comments to you. Though, I wonder, in this Instagram example, how many people are commenting on this girl's post about her boyfriend going golfing or whatever? Yeah. There's enough things to suss out, different engagement for him and her. Are these some kind of super celebrities or something? Or
it's one of these posts that's gone viral, and so it has hundreds of thousands of comments. You wouldn't need much more than a couple hundred comments to be able to start ranking them, though. You wouldn't need that viral a post to start.
Well, that would be. Certainly anything I tweet is not going to get hundreds of comments. And most of the people I follow, I guess there probably some people are getting do have that kind of following, so it's a mixed bag there.
I do find that replies on tweets are oftentimes not related to the original tweet themselves. People just try to get in there and make a reply quickly before someone else can.
If it's like Elon Musk tweeting or something.
Yeah, that's a real... Twitter's terrible for that's why I like Reddit so much more. You get a topic and then all these ranked comments about it underneath.
Yeah, if X could do some kind of upvoting and downvoting of replies, that would be good, huh?
Yeah, we need to get those quality replies to the top. Right now, it's sorted by whether or not you have the blue check and then when you commented, and it's just awful. It's terrible. You will get so when you click on someone's Twitter post, you will get the people that you follow. You'll get their replies first, not the chronological. But it's a mess out there. So Brian, I had one last thing to bring up from Duncan Trussell's appearance in the JRE, and this was an interpretation of Christianity I'd not heard before. I just thought it was interesting, so I think I shall now share it with you and our wider System Failure podcast audience. Now, I think we've probably talked about this any number of times on the System Failure podcast, but the idea, the core idea behind meditation is that all you really have is the present. You've heard this 1,000 times, I'm sure, Brian, but we've all had the experience, I'm sure, of getting together with family, remembering a family reunion or events from our childhood, and then finding out that other people remember them differently, or that they didn't happen at all, or that they happened to other people. Right? There's the Mandela effect, where you think back to the Fruit of the Loom logo with the cornucopia on it, only to find out that the Fruit of the Loom never used the cornucopia as their logo, or that it was always the Bernstein Bears, right? The Mandela effect.
One thing about the cornucopia logo is if you see the makeups that people do, the draw up is exactly like how I remember it being that people do with the cornucopia in the background, and that's wild. Anyway, that's the only real one that gets me is the Fruit of the Loom logo.
That bothers me too. It really lends credence to the simulation theory or multiverse hypothesis, or very least Platonism. But for the purposes of this way of viewing Christianity, you just have to think of the past as this whole mental model that has only a tenuous relationship to what might have actually happened. So in other words, we're all haunted by this past that didn't really happen. Even if the memories you have are true, you'll have forgotten memories that don't conform to a certain narrative structure. So you, Brian, have a story you tell yourself about your life, and all of the things that happen to you that fit that storyline you remember, and everything that happens that doesn't fit that storyline you forget, and it's once you've forgotten it, it's completely gone and unavailable to you. So much in the way that Michelangelo starts with a block of marble and sees David standing in his contrapposto pose within it, and frees David from the surrounding marble, just leaving the figure. So too do we do that with our body of available memories. We carve a story out of it, like a shape, like that's shaped like a narrative.
Wang and all.
Yeah. Well, you could just tell that Michelangelo, a homosexual man who had a very fond love for the male frame, he was very careful when it came to, carving the wiener and David's balls there. And he did a fine job. They're well formed. There's no argument. It is really a striking. Everyone should go check it out live at the Academy of Fine Arts in Florence. It's really a striking sculpture. I can see why it was so popular. The original idea was to have that David standing at the very top of the Duomo, like overlooking all of Florence, but it turned out to be way too heavy. So they had to install him next to the entrance of the Palazzo Vecchio in Florence instead of next to the Duomo. And then now a replica stands there, and the real article is safely housed in the Academy of Fine Arts in Florence. But all this is to say, your past is made up and is not real. It's a story you've made up for yourself and for all intents and purposes. And then the other thing, so the past causes people a lot of heartburn and pain, a lot of insecurities, a lot of trauma from your past, and so it's like this mental article that's entirely conjured up through our own mind that haunts us in the present. And then if you look at the future, right, how often does the future pan out as you're expecting it to pan out? Right? Virtually never. Things rarely go as expected. And so the point I wanted to make here is that we are living in the moment right now, recording this podcast. It's a beautiful Sunday afternoon. But I have this mental model of the past and future which haunt me. I have dread about the fact that I have to go to work tomorrow, and I have trauma about things happening to me when I was a kid, and all of these things are swirling around, memories and anticipations of the future, and they're all distractions from the beautiful present moment. And so one way you could interpret the story of Calvary, or one way you could interpret the tenuousness of the present moment on which we're balanced like a knife edge between the horrifying past and the yawning chasm of the future that lies before us. You're really perched precariously. And so one allegory for illustrating that is the idea is that you are precariously nailed to a cross between the two thieves, concerns about the past and the future, crucified to your left and right. Right. So every one of us has this experience of being, precariously stuck on a knife's edge between the two thieves, the past and the future, that steal our happiness. So anyway, Duncan was describing Christianity in this way, and I was quite entertained by it. It's like Christianity, it makes sense from the sense of it. The story of death and rebirth makes sense in the context of ego death and psychedelic drugs. It makes sense in the context of debts and debt forgiveness and sin. And it also makes sense from this meditative standpoint. There are so many layers to Christianity. It's also a calendar. There's also numerological, right? Great example. We all know that water freezes at what temperature, Brian?
32 degrees.
Well, it freezes at 33, right? 32. Becomes 32 is a solid. 33, it's a liquid, right? And what temperature does water boil at?
212.
212. Yeah. So it's exactly 180 degrees, right? When you talk about degrees, right? When we talk about the zodiac, which is 360 degrees around the equator of the Earth, that belt is whacked up into 12 constellations of 30 degrees each. And there's a neutral zone that's often proposed between them, because you're talking about when you're moving from, let's say, Pisces to Aquarius, it's really hard to, there's a little bit of a wiggle room. You don't quite know when you're moving from, when you're in the constellation of Pisces versus when you're actually in the constellation of Aquarius. There's a little bit of a neutral zone. So usually a 3-degree neutral zone is presented between 3 and 33. So each constellation is 30 degrees, minus degree and a half neutral zone that exists in between each. So oftentimes, always the Savior is, it comes of age at age 30 and is crucified at age 33. The changing of the astrological guard, and that's reflected in the number system, right? 32, like the highest degree of Freemasonry is 33rd degree. 33 degrees Fahrenheit will change your water from a solid to a liquid, and then 180 degrees later, at 212 degrees, you'll turn from a liquid into a gas. Numerology like that is baked into Christianity, right? The same reason there's 12 hours in the day, because there's 12 signs of the zodiac, and that's the same reason Jesus has 12 disciples. You can just keep on going down the numerological list. And so it's just interesting how much the story of Christianity, how many layers there are to it. It's like the story morphs and changes depending on what you need in your life, depending on what you're going through. It can mean so many different things. It's this one story that has so many different applications. I just find it fascinating from that perspective. And so that's why I really loved Duncan suggesting that being nailed to a cross between two thieves is an allegory for the way all of us spend all of our lives all the time. So you should definitely hit this pod, Brian, if you haven't listened to it.
Well, it's another layer on the onion for sure. Staying focused in the present is definitely key.
It's precarious. It's hard to do because the past and the future are always stealing from you.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, I think that's about that about brings us to the juncture, Brian, where I always exhort our audience to go ahead and send us an email and let us know what you think about being nailed to the cross. That email address that you can reach us at is nop@substack.com. And if you want to read some exciting essays about similar topics, you can hit us up at nop.substack.com and read the essays there. This week we'll have an exciting one about the Roman Empire and the structure of Roman civilization, the structure of the story, the historiography of Rome that's often overlooked in the Twitter threads that conservatives often post on Twitter, glorifying and nostalgizing the Roman Empire. They skip over some of these details. So check it out at nop.substack.com.
All right, we'll see you folks.
Alrighty, see you everyone. Bye-bye.